Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Lumea Lui Dungaciu. We've got a lot lined up for you today, including the fascinating social phenomenon of Charlie Kirk, who is basically revitalizing the MAGA movement. Honestly, it almost feels like a spiritual awakening for America. We'll also be diving into the more troubling situation unfolding across Europe. For example, in Ludwigshafen, Germany, there's been yet another round of cancellations and suspensions of political candidates. Then there's the whole story about the sovereignist and conservative movement that Giorgia Meloni is trying to unify across Europe. And we certainly can't forget the latest developments coming out of Ukraine. We need to unpack all of these important issues for you with our regular guest and expert, Professor Dungaciu. Professor, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here again.
Thank you for the invite. It's always a pleasure.
I'm sure many of you stayed up late Sunday night watching those deeply moving scenes featuring the MAGA leaders, America's current leaders. This brings us to an important topic we must address. The entire political establishment across party lines that couldn't afford to miss the funeral of a figure who seems destined to become a new Martin Luther King, this time for the conservative movement in this country. It's truly an iconic moment, really striking, a portrait of a young man, just 31 years old, cold-bloodedly murdered under tragic circumstances. We haven't yet had the opportunity to discuss this in depth, but as a sociologist who carefully observes the subtle signals society sends out, I'm curious, how do you interpret this wave of collective emotion, the posthumous glorification, the almost mythic status being conferred, and how this is reigniting and galvanizing the MAGA movement into renewed energy and purpose?
This is a very important aspect of this phenomenon, but to fully understand its multiple. When it comes to social and political positions, I think it's really worth taking a moment to compare the situation with a phenomenon that we discussed extensively some time ago. It was going against the spirit of the times in a way. You might recall what happened on May 25, 2020, a date that marked a significant turning point in the collective awareness of social justice issues. George Floyd. That moment was truly a significant turning point, if you will, in how we approach and understand the complex social and political issues surrounding race and justice today. The social and political realities, as interpreted by the left, if we can call it that, dominate decision-making and public discourse in America today. In that reflection, we see both the hypocrisy and, excuse me for being blunt, the moral filth of those who condemn how Charlie Kirk was honored and remembered, a key figure in the conservative movement, as you rightly noted. On May 25, 2020, when George Floyd died following what seemed to be an excessively harsh police approach, many people vividly remember the event. During the trial, it was eventually revealed that his death wasn't a direct assassination, it wasn't a clear-cut murder as some claimed. This nuanced understanding seems lost in the fervor of public debate, yet the left condemns Kirk for his role and influence, ignoring these complexities. This double standard is glaring, and it highlights how so much of the discourse is shaped more by ideology than facts. People on both sides should take a moment to reconsider how these issues are framed rather than falling into polarized traps. Not just a simple overdose, but even as a consequence of that overdose. To draw a comparison between different characters here without trying to judge too harshly or unfairly, George Floyd was a man with a pretty serious criminal record, so to speak, arrested nearly every year over a long period for things including cocaine possession, violent assaults, and attacks. Really the whole spectrum of criminal behavior you could imagine, covering a wide range of offenses, if you will.
Robbery, exactly.
Robbery, armed assault, those crimes definitely mean years in prison, no doubt about that at all.
A Barabbas, you could say, pardon me.
He acted with no judgment at all, without any real critical thinking involved. The police officers who approached him in a much more forceful and aggressive manner were never charged with murder, only second or third degree manslaughter. What this means is
Negligence.
indirect crime, meaning in some way you facilitated or created the exact conditions that led this person to lose their life. That's the reality of what happened. Naturally, the public pressure was immense, absolutely overwhelming. Around this particular case, a whole worldview started to be built. A political project of sorts emerged. All of society, both good and evil, began to be defined based on this single case. Profound political implications were drawn from it, you could say. I'm mentioning all of this so that our viewers can draw comparisons with what's happening today, especially with the accusations being made against American conservatives and how they respond to this case. Against American conservatives and how they approach this case. The political consequences of the Floyd case were very clear, We were in the middle of a pandemic. Don't forget that context. But the real pandemic is racism. They voiced it with such hatred. So when I saw those scenes during the pandemic where, well, white youths kissed the feet of African Americans in a gesture of collective atonement, so to speak, that's where the real pandemic is, racism.
Nancy Pelosi kneeling.
The kneeling of Miss Nancy Pelosi was a powerful image. Even if the COVID pandemic eventually fades away, the more insidious racist pandemic remains deeply entrenched in our society. Racism has become a major lens through which society is judged and evaluated. This ongoing racist pandemic brought to the forefront books like White Fragility, which have become essential frameworks for evaluation and training in many American corporations. People attend sessions to learn how corporations and their employees should address racism properly and effectively. White Fragility is a complex book that discusses the idea that if you're white, it's nearly impossible not to be racist. It's a challenging book, one that people find difficult to escape from because it offers no clear-cut solutions to the problem. Selection criteria for jobs, whether you worked in computer science, physics, or chemistry, increasingly depend on these kinds of classifications. Political criteria, once important, no longer hold the same weight. They're talking about political agendas. Actually, that's precisely where everything began and truly grew, because the entire public sphere and later the political arena became dominated by this one event. People took to the streets in huge numbers demanding change, and police budgets were slashed. Cut the budgets for American police. It all started in Minnesota. The American cities were literally burning. Fires blazed through neighborhoods. Yet, strangely, nobody seemed eager to quickly extinguish those fires. In fact, watching those flames burn revealed the deep moral decay within America far more clearly. This whole scandal, which reverberated and lasted for years, was in fact triggered by that single case. Sure, the case itself was dramatic and tragic, but that's not really the focus here. What's important is how the entire American left seized this moment and transformed it into a broader political theory, a social theory, and a cultural theory. Call it what you will, an ideology shaped from tragedy.
It's really crucial that you point that out, and I hope you don't mind the interruption, but Tyler Robinson, the alleged killer of Charlie back then, radicalized precisely during the pandemic period you mentioned. During that time, he traveled to Portland and came into contact with paramilitary groups like Antifa. So this phenomenon you're describing is vital to understanding the radicalization of younger generations of white people, especially those burdened with intense feelings of guilt. Take Tyler Robinson, for example. He came from a deeply conservative family, even MAGA supporters, yet he fell in love with someone from the LGBT community. But that's beside the point I want to make. This radicalization of consciousness was very clearly described by Alan Bloom in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, when referring to the prior generation. The 60s generation was in a sense resurrected in almost Stalinist terms, a radicalization, or if you will, a kind of Bolshevism that we're seeing now in the 2020s.
Sure, and it was revived and made clear. Let's really understand this fully. Maybe Lucian Blaga was right when he said eternity was born in the village, but modernity was born in the city. In other words, whoever controls the cities controls the public space, controls the public conversation.
That's when Kurt got angry.
Big cities, the media, messages to politicians, the press from New York Times to CNN, whatever you want, all shape the narrative and influence public opinion at every level.
Companies.
People don't fully grasp what's happening here, or they aren't paying close attention to this quietly unfolding phenomenon. The structural change in society didn't necessarily start with intellectuals' rhetoric. It actually began within companies' practices, and this is quite important. Because when companies are told they must hire certain types of people, maintain specific quotas, or be extremely careful when bidding, it's not just about business, it's also about social responsibility and political correctness. If they meet conditions beyond economic ones, social, cultural, political, those companies start to silently implement certain practices. Over time, these practices begin shaping society in ways people might not immediately notice. So it's not only intellectuals spreading these ideas through discourse. When major corporations adopt them, they become the norm, the social standard. For example, if in Florida a board has to include a certain number of people of color, lesbians and others as well, the board must be structured that way, regardless of the traditional criteria. Selection criteria stop being purely about actual merit. That's precisely why Boeing once said, look, when planes started crashing, it probably wasn't because of how we selected so many people here. It illustrates how complex and sometimes contradictory these imposed changes can be. And these things are reshaping the foundations without us always realizing it. The real consequences became apparent when the head of the Secret Service openly said her goal was to have at least 30% women agents. But honestly, your goal in such a critical role should be functionality and effectiveness, regardless of whether it's women or men filling those positions.
Or with robots.
With everything, the dignity of those being protected must always come first and foremost. Your professional or management plan shouldn't be about fulfilling a quota like hiring 30% women or 40% African Americans. That's missing the point entirely. The criteria shifted and honestly got completely messed up. This whole chain of events was heavily driven by the fact that Antifa was recently labeled a terrorist organization. That radicalization didn't come from nowhere. It was fueled and sustained by the official media, the entire public sphere, all Democrats, and many high-ranking political figures. At that time, Kamala Harris was a very vocal and active supporter of these movements from her influential position, essentially second in command in the US political establishment. Everything was fanned and escalated from there. I don't want to state what should be obvious, but seriously, tell me conservatives didn't start by politicizing such an event. It's clear they didn't. The politics around this have been fueled and manipulated at the highest levels, turning a specific issue into a broad and divisive political tool. We need to recognize these dynamics honestly if we want to move forward constructively. It's a moment of peak political inclusivity, a rare time when every voice was part of the conversation. This reaction came from years of tension, with the American left keeping this narrative alive in all areas: economy, politics, culture, universities. Professors were forced to follow hiring rules shaped by student groups enforcing political correctness. This all began as a response to that event, which held strategic importance across society. Everyone who stayed silent then, who didn't speak out, missed the chance to call for unity, like Robert Kennedy's famous speech after Martin Luther King's assassination. No similar calls for peace came from the left after later events. This silence allowed political exploitation, turning tragedies into tools for a new cultural and political order. We must be cautious and remember those who stayed silent, enabling this shift. The close ones told him, "Don't go there, don't talk to the crowds," because they were too close. He gave a conciliatory speech, one calling for peace and American unity. It was absolutely fabulous. Short and sweet, that was him. After that, after Floyd, I didn't see any speech from the American left calling for unity, because these are Democrats, political predators. They know what power means. They seized this case systematically, using every tool at their disposal, from law enforcement to media, and turned this case into the text and pretext for a new cultural and political order. That's what happened in America. We have to be very careful when we speak, because of all the hypocrisy from those who stayed silent then, who didn't say, "Hey, calm down," who didn't stop this from turning into something else. Don't fuel it, don't shove nails into the wound, don't try to. This is exactly what they did. Those people who didn't stay silent back then, saying this can't go on. How does the American administration handle this case? What do they want to make of it? Why politicize it when, compared to what happened with Floyd, this, is a piece of cake? This was a public memorial, truly sparked by a resurgence of values, conservative MAGA type, however you want to call them, because there you see a national resurrection, an identity resurrection, a religious resurrection, and all kinds of resurrections.
Especially religious, Professor.
Undeniably, especially religious, no doubt.
Charlie Kirk spoke passionately, almost like an evangelist, embracing this value as something truly fundamental and central to his message. Moreover, Erica Kirk's presence on the scene introduced a fresh perspective on femininity, which, as we know, has been reclaimed in pop culture over recent years, particularly among younger generations. Just think about figures like Taylor Swift or other influential entertainers who represent various viewpoints and identities. But when it comes to the accusations of racism aimed at the conservative establishment, Professor, there are clear contradictions to consider. For instance, J.D. Vance is married to Usha Vance, who is of Indian descent, and Kash Patel, who serves in a top FBI position, is also a person of color. Additionally, many individuals of Indian heritage are featured prominently in the Forbes 500, and numerous leading American companies have executives with Asian backgrounds. We also can't overlook the remarkable competence and extraordinary academic achievements of Asian Americans, who consistently excel at the country's top universities and contribute significantly across various fields throughout the nation.
This racial resurrection was incredibly important because wokeism encompasses a dimension, and even a gender dimension, that clearly appeals to a specific audience. The paradox is quite fascinating. The American black population in reality tends to be conservative. The LGBTQ+ movement and some facets of wokeism don't resonate strongly with them. This is why they needed this racial resurrection. Wokeism didn't awaken or mobilize everyone. It primarily rallies a particular social category: urban, relatively educated, young professionals in liberal fields, and so on. Afro-Americans looked at it somewhat differently, coming from a culture that's much more traditional. What about Catholic migrants from South America? This movement didn't really catch on with them either. So, in reaction, they tried very hard to revive the issue of racism through the unfortunate and tragic case of George Floyd, aiming to keep a broader population mobilized. That was really the whole motivation behind it, to maintain engagement across a wider social spectrum through invoking racial tensions. This approach proved effective in keeping attention and energy within various communities, even if not universally accepted by every demographic group affected. And they continuously pushed these ideas forward, really trying to create a whole new type of political order, if you will. Over time, we've examined this a lot, and there's been a lot of discussion around MAGA, what the MAGA movement truly represents. It's certainly a fresh new political movement, but MAGA doesn't stand for traditional republicanism, not even Reagan's version of it.
Yes. It's something different, something else entirely. It's what Bannon once called populism, because as he later admitted, the term nationalist sounded bad. Even to Americans, nationalism sounded bad. I say this because nationalism in Europe was tarnished after the World Wars. But even in the US, despite having no direct blame for what happened during those times in Europe, nationalism still sounded off to many people. Coming back to the US context, MAGA represents something new, but it arose amid many other changes, including major social movements like the Floyd case and the rise of wokeism, which Democrats tried to institutionalize. The party's doctrine shifted significantly because of multiple movements within Biden's leadership. That was Biden's weakness. They kept Biden as party leader precisely because he was weak enough that no single faction, be it African American, wokist, or traditional Democrats, could dominate the agenda. This created a kind of balance, but also confusion about the party's true direction. It's a complex dynamic that shaped the political landscape we're witnessing today.
Or the traditional democratic agenda, which really has nothing to do with what we've witnessed recently. The political space, the way communication happens, they've changed dramatically over time. Those who articulated these ideas had a complex line of thinking behind them, involving not just the Floyd case, but also other significant cultural shifts and movements.
The wokeist movement wasn't just a social shift, it was a political strategy to allow many migrants into the US, forming a major power project. That project stalled, and Trump's election marked a turning point against it. What happened with Charlie Kirk is less about revenge and more a political shift, a new phase in American politics. It's not just an Obamian extreme, but a profound transformation, signaling a very different political landscape moving forward.
I'm mentioning Obama because Kirk was basically born with this political awareness. You know, in his parents' garage, he was always trying to answer one big fundamental question. How do I respond to Obama's attempt to fundamentally change America? And Kirk said clearly, Turning Point USA will be my answer to that challenge. That's the visionary mindset of an 18-year-old. Really remarkable. Turning Point USA is my answer to Obama's legacy. You have to understand, Obama sparked the Tea Party movement. He sparked quite a few new movements that changed the political landscape in America.
That's where it all started.
The roots of the MAGA movement are clearly seen in young Kirk's speeches when he was just 21 or 22. Then, of course, with the 2016 victory, MAGA became a solid movement.
MAGA is actually a reaction, not the original spark many imagine. Trump didn't just appear shouting slogans. He responded to a deeply broken system. Obama represents that failure. Despite his talent and intelligence, one of the most gifted politicians America has seen, Obama couldn't bring the change the country needed. He lacked the strength and influence to truly transform America. This created a vacuum that Trump seized, building the MAGA movement from that. Obama had a vision beyond his reach. He saw America needed to pivot to the Pacific as the future of global power, but he never fully achieved this shift. Hillary Clinton's famous 2011 foreign policy article highlighted it. How many years ago was that? Though clear on this, Obama couldn't complete it. He often promised to withdraw troops from combat zones but failed to follow through. In many ways, Obama couldn't reshape America as he intended. Even his right ideas didn't truly get implemented during his presidency.
But the bad ideas did, you know.
Obama's bad ideas. Wait a second. Many forget or never knew Obama had a plan to redesign American banknotes, changing the faces on them, which caused quite a controversy. American historical legends. The redesign originally showed all white presidents reflecting their times. The goal was to honor civil rights heroes, especially advocates for the black community. They created new dies to change the $20 bills to feature these heroes. However, one supporting law was repealed during Trump's administration. So yes, during Obama's presidency, there was a big cultural battle over these symbols and what they represent.
That's why they're pushing to get rid of cash now, because those familiar faces on the bills haven't changed. Just kidding.
In America, they'll ditch cash when they take guns away. I mean, guns are a whole different deal. It's really about the attitude people have toward government control. Let's be very clear. Guns are meant for the government in a way. When the government starts to take your cash, restrict your freedoms, and limit your property rights, that's when guns become a crucial tool. The right to bear arms is enshrined in the Constitution as a safeguard. It's built on the fundamental idea that citizens have a right and even a duty to defend themselves if the government becomes oppressive or overreaching.
Of course. So this is if you want something way beyond just the simple act of carrying a gun. Okay, let's get back to this. Sure, Obama, there was definitely a clear failure there. Yes, you called it the Tea Party, but Bannon, seriously, where did Bannon come from? Charles Kirk, that's where.
From Sarah Palin.
His reaction. But that was afterwards.
Sarah Palin came after Bannon supported her because he believed, we can say rightly so, that the country needed a new kind of politician to face emerging and complex challenges. Sarah Palin was that kind of experiment, a testing ground of sorts, until Donald Trump emerged and changed the landscape completely. What I mean to say is that figures like Charles Kirk and Steve Bannon, they all came from that same movement, the same mindset. This whole drive to reinvent America, to make something new and impactful happen, was genuinely real and passionate. In that sense, the callback to Obama is more than just relevant. It makes a lot of sense historically and politically. But to bring us back to the core point here, it's crucial to understand that everything happening today is partly a reaction to what came before. You can't merely dismiss Trump by saying, look at how he exaggerates everything, because there's more to the story. There's a mitigating circumstance here. The Romanian public wasn't fully aware, and the Romanian press made sure to be very careful about how information spread. That context is key when trying to grasp the full picture.
About the United States, this went on for years. Whenever we talked, we discussed what was happening in America. As I said, we spoke against the current, so to speak. Unfortunately, the press in Europe, especially in Romania, treated even
the first Trump administration was widely seen as the period of a president still in opposition, lacking legitimacy, and perceived as merely passing through. The main idea in Europe, especially within the Romanian government and press, was to grit our teeth, endure those 4 years, and await a return to the stability and normalcy that had been lost. Of course, most Romanians didn't fully understand the complexities of what was happening in the US at the time. But it's important to remind everyone that what we see in America today is not at all what was expected or anticipated back then. The situation has evolved far beyond initial impressions and predictions. It's the showmanship of a politician, if you will. This reaction comes from an America that's been through so much already. It has had to withstand immense pressures, especially from the Biden administration, but also the Obama administration before it. Now, when I say the Biden administration, I'm not referring to Biden personally. Instead, I mean all the major power centers that were influential during his tenure. This includes academic institutions, public discourse, political entities, the mainstream media, and so on. So really, this reaction is from a broader America responding to what we've called the ballot revolution in the United States. We need to understand that Trump's elections represented a genuine electoral revolution. It didn't just change the presidency, it fundamentally transformed much of what was happening across the country. One key reaction, one expression of this electoral upheaval, is the response to a truly tragic event, the assassination of one of the most vocal and significant leaders who embodied this movement. It's about the politico-religious core of the MAGA movement. This is the crucial point we need to understand here. Everything must be put into context to really grasp the enormous scale of this issue. It's not just an obsession with Donald Trump or J.D. Vance, regardless of how remarkable and compelling speakers they might be. This goes so much deeper. It's a deeply rooted movement with widespread influence that is shaping and transforming America's future fundamentally. If anyone still has doubts, recent events should convince them beyond any question that no matter who assumes power, even if, hypothetically, the Trump administration were to fail, America is not going back to what it was under Biden. This is no return to the previous status quo. The country we know today is a new America, one defined by a different dynamic, a fresh vision, and a changed political landscape altogether. Most likely, this new America will be confirmed in the upcoming and very much expected electoral battle between Governor Gavin Newsom and J.D. Vance, at least as things currently stand as we speak.
The governor of California and J.D. Vance are definitely key figures right now, at least for the time being as we speak.
Charlie Kirk, while you were speaking, I was thinking about giving you some quotes to highlight this, but then I realized there's no point putting too much emphasis on that. It's clear Romania had serious institutional reactions to George Floyd's death. Many voices in Bucharest, especially politicians, quickly condemned all forms of racism, though their condemnations had a distinct Eastern European nuance. But, Professor, I believe it's important to move beyond just the Floyd moment, although the comparison remains quite useful and heuristic, just as you demonstrated earlier. My main focus would be on the ongoing developments in the aftermath of that event within the MAGA movement, which has now rather surprisingly brought together Elon Musk and Donald Trump in an unusual alliance. And it's equally unusual to see Tucker Carlson sharing the stage with an establishment figure like Senator Marco Rubio. What I want to point out is that Charlie Kirk, who has been quite vocal in his criticism, let's not forget, of the Zelensky regime and the uncritical support for Ukraine, has actually managed to unify various personalities, sensitivities, and even some quite different doctrines within the MAGA movement that wouldn't normally be so easy to reconcile. Personalities, sensitivities, even doctrines within the MAGA movement that wouldn't normally be easy to reconcile.
The MAGA movement right now is incredibly strong, so strong and powerful that it feels like an unstoppable wave sweeping across the country right now. Elon Musk and Marco Rubio are smart, but neither really comes from the MAGA movement. Rubio's background is more traditional, yet he understands and absorbs the power of MAGA. There's no opposing it. Even Musk, with all his influence and ingenuity, can't stand against this force.
No one dared skip that funeral.
Even Elon Musk can't afford to oppose this movement. Sure, sometimes he's unpredictable, even a bit eccentric in a way that's refreshing, but he's far from foolish. He deeply senses this enormous force. Despite his unique personality, intense media influence, and vast financial resources, Musk hasn't managed to offer a real alternative political option. Why is that? Because the wave is simply too massive, too powerful to push back against. Kirk embodies this wave. He represents how it has manifested itself politically and culturally. And yes, he's both fueled this wave and expressed it simultaneously. All these people who keep saying no, they have no direct connection to its core. They're outsiders. Musk indeed fought an impressive battle against the democratic establishment, no doubt about it. But remember, even he couldn't overcome the overwhelming momentum of this movement. Initially, the preference likely shared by Fox News was for DeSantis or someone else, not Trump. It wasn't Trump's aggressive style, but a more conservative establishment approach. The Florida governor's launch on Musk's platforms came later, after they realized Trump was too powerful for this political battle. Seeing Trump's massive influence and energy, they had to adapt and ride his wave. This is now the core of conservative politics. You can't deny it, no matter how hard some try. It's almost a litmus test for political relevance. How could anyone reject a force commanding such loyalty? That's the reality, plain and simple.
I was watching the crowd's reaction closely. So there were first 200,000 people inside the stadium, then another 100,000 outside, and millions, hundreds of millions watched. Some even say billions. They tuned into this funeral. The funeral of Charlie Kirk will probably be close, statistically, to that of John Paul II, who also electrified the masses. When Trump appeared, it was sheer madness. The crowd stopped and sang. There was a religious hymn playing. Everyone cheered him wildly. Incredible. When other figures showed up, it wasn't quite like that. So, Trump remains the undisputed king of the movement. No one dares criticize him today. J.D. Vance seems to be second most popular. I watched again. The crowd's response was electric. Tucker Carlson, although quite idiosyncratic lately, attacking the State Department's Israel policy, criticizing some excesses, is still accepted, probably because of his close bond with Kirk. They were very close friends. Besides other MAGA figures, Tucker Carlson is widely accepted, likely due to his close bond with Charlie Kirk. They were almost like brothers. Now, our listeners will have questions, and we thank everyone for their support. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people. Professor, Romanians often ask, you focus a lot on Kirk and the MAGA movement, but how does this really affect us here? What's the connection to our political and social scene?
Good question. But today, The Guardian features an article on a comprehensive report by the European Council for Foreign Relations. This report discusses the ongoing cultural conflict between America and Europe in depth, highlighting it as a crucial battle impacting politics, society, and core values across both continents. Under the banner of that iconic and famous film, The Truman Show, if you remember correctly, it came out about 10 years ago. No, wait, maybe 15 or even closer to 20 years ago, something like that. Well, you know, the concept is fascinating. Imagine a character whose entire life is essentially a filmed show from the moment of birth through to adulthood. And then at some point, this character wants to reclaim their privacy, their real life beyond the cameras and public scrutiny. Now, this is the metaphor they used to describe Europe in the recent report from the European Council on Foreign Relations. It's not just any institution, but one of the main reference points shaping European strategic vision. Their takeaway isn't merely about technical foreign policy, but rather a deep strategic perspective. The report boldly claims that Europe is in the middle of a cultural war with America. It's a wake-up call, urging Europe to take ownership and not shy away. The title itself says it all. Europe must not concede in this ongoing cultural war with America. For me, this introductory idea we've discussed is fundamental because it sets the stage for how the future of transatlantic relations will be shaped. It outlines the pressures and expectations on both sides and how Europe might be compelled to respond to these challenges. We start this discussion remembering Clinton's advisor's famous line, "It's the economy, stupid." That phrase defined the focus then. Economics shaped politics and public views. It's really about culture now. The economy no longer defines everything like it used to. Just look at what the Americans did during his funeral. It was a powerful statement that went beyond economics. Kirk represented a spiritual dimension, a spiritual, cultural, and political vision. Europeans say we should respond similarly to preserve our identities. We need to enter what I call a cultural war, which will impact us since it will shift to Europe and its nation states. Europe has two layers, Brussels Europe and the Europe of national states. Brussels urges us to engage in this cultural war, showing manipulated surveys filled with false optimism. As a sociologist, I can say Brussels hasn't asked about national identity in years. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Eurobarometers did ask how people identify nationally. Back in 2015, at least 10 years ago now, we published a comprehensive book about the UK and the so-called perfect storm Europe was facing. In that book, Eurobarometer surveys raised an important question about European identity and public opinion trends. How do you identify nationally? Do you consider yourself only European or both European and national, or maybe just national? Sir, from 1992 up until about 2015 or thereabouts, these were common ways people identified themselves. Support for European identity has only ever reached about 3 to 4%, even during major developments in Europe. At most, it stayed around 4%. European and national identities combined added about 12 or 13%, those who identified as both European and national, and those who identified only as national. National and European identities accounted for 82, 84, 85%. You understand? That's how Europe was. Regardless of expansions and new members, this was always a pressing issue. We published these findings in a book in the UK back in 2015 during a time of great tension. Migrants, Angela Merkel, Brexit, terrorism, these are critical issues shaping Europe's sociological reality today. When people feel threatened, when concerns about security arise, like what's going to happen to me, who's going to protect me, they don't instinctively look to distant Brussels for answers. Instead, they turn towards local political parties. This has fueled the rise of nativist movements, starting with Alternative für Deutschland as a direct reaction to Merkel's migrant policies. Historically, Europe has always struggled with this underlying tension. Interestingly, recent Eurobarometer surveys have stopped asking questions about nationhood, focusing only on attitudes toward Europe, which generally come out as positive. But we must understand that identities aren't like mere opinions or preferences you can just change. They're layered and multiple. For example, I can identify simultaneously as European, national, a football fan, and even regional. The crucial issue that emerges is which of these identities becomes dominant in a given moment. And the ultimate existential question is, for which identity would you be willing to risk your very life?
Professor, if I may, beyond culture, there's more to consider here. The economy, I believe it's actually religion, because, forgive me, I can't help but notice Marco Rubio's speech was like a theologian outlining the story of creation, how man fell into sin, how Jesus came and was crucified, and how we, infected by sin, must embrace faith in Jesus who will save us. So Marco Rubio, forgive me, the head of American diplomacy. Some are upset about religious people in Romanian state institutions. Yeah, they want a purge. I hear such a move is being prepared. Well, Marco Rubio, head of American diplomacy, head of US ambassadors worldwide, gave a theological speech. Then comes...
Can you imagine that in Romania?
J.D. Vance really doubles down, admitting he's spoken about Jesus in the past 2 weeks more than ever before. Even Donald Trump, though more Old Testament in his views, admits he struggles to forgive his enemies. Still, Trump references Jesus, grace, forgiveness, hope, and redemption in his speeches, which is quite telling.
He can't forgive on a personal level, but this is about America. It's different. I mean, you forgive personally, but you can't forgive on behalf of the entire community.
So, Professor, please, let's really compare these situations carefully. Forget about Romania for a moment, which claims to be orthodox, yet sends representatives like Mrs. Soyu to handle foreign affairs. Let's just set Romania aside for now. Now, look at Mr. Macron. Tell me honestly, does he show any real sensitivity toward religion or the sacred scriptures that were mentioned in that funeral speech? Is there any sign of that at all? What about Mr. Merz? When you see Merz, do you get even a small hint of that traditional Christian Democrat spirit, that deep-rooted faith influencing his politics? And when you consider Starmer, can you say with confidence that he connects even slightly with the biblical or Christian heritage that shaped much of Europe's history? The truth is, Europe is for the most part atheist, Professor, especially Western Europe. That's the reality we have to face today.
Let's get back to what I was saying. We're in a cultural war, and Europeans felt it instinctively, almost like someone sensitive to religion would. You know how certain institutions react strongly whenever religion gets involved, often causing discomfort and uneasy reactions? Europeans sense that very deeply. Even Marco Rubio's speech here captures this dynamic quite well. I truly believe Rubio's role in the MAGA movement is deeply rooted in religious conviction, which reflects a broader spiritual dimension to the whole political movement.
Catholic.
He's tapping deeply into the Catholic religious roots, being from that particular region. That has become his main way of entering the MAGA movement, so to speak. Yes, it's undeniably a strong religious resurgence. Now, for it to succeed, it really has to be intense and passionate. Among certain religious groups that unquestionably vote and support Trump, some are even well placed in the cultural and financial American space. It's not just about public communication. So, coming back to America, it's more than a country. It's like a living entity, almost like an animal in the best sense. It rises and moves with energy, spiritually, nationally, religiously, driven by a mission far beyond what Albright ever described. America truly sees itself as indispensable, believing it must bring order everywhere. It's deeply aware of its unique identity and its duty to make America great and strong again. This isn't about a secular mission like before. Its sense of purpose now is intertwined with a profound spiritual and national calling, which marks a distinct shift in how America perceives its role on the world stage.
The export of democracy.
Democracy exports? That's really not her business at all, no.
She declared war on them.
She didn't declare any, both.
Or they didn't even come to.
They were much more active at the beginning. Nobody assigned them a mission to make the world a better place. Look, God left the world just as it is. I don't really care how others live or what religion they follow. As Donald Trump once said, we've destroyed more communities than we've built through the nation-building projects America undertook, supposedly in the name of values it no longer truly shares. Trump made it clear, you failed at this project. Don't act like gods of the world because there's only one God, and he handles things his own way. He knows best what needs to be done. So we simply can't afford to hold that mindset any longer. And frankly, we aren't doing it anymore. We only want good relations with the world. And for those relationships to benefit us, Americans, that's all there is to it. Think of it as the MAGA project, if you will, in geopolitical terms. If you haven't understood that yet, if you don't realize that if you're not with them, you'll never be, and if you're not like them, you'll never truly belong, that means you haven't grasped a thing about today's geopolitics or the reality of the 21st century. These truths are critical to understanding the current state of global affairs. The 21st century has seen major cultural shifts. The MAGA movement shows this clearly. If you can't engage with them on their terms, you'll never be aligned with the United States. Talks about NATO or transatlantic unity don't hold much weight here. This is the core of the culture war. We identify with each other in specific ways. Think of Soros's world. It was defined by scent, style, attitude, and behavior. People recognized each other instantly. Now, MAGA's world, Trump's world, is building the same kind of shared signals, helping people recognize and connect, and just as importantly, identify who's outside their world. It's like Romanian politics under Soros' influence. Now a new world emerges, shaped by today's cultural and political battles, born from new identities and alliances.
A new world is emerging now, the MAGA world, Trump's world, which looks very much like what we've seen before, bringing back that religious and identity-focused talk. Faced with this reality, as you rightly said, Europe remains paralyzed because it has lost almost any religious dimension it once held dear.
Except for Poland and Romania.
Including Poland and Ireland. Well, if we look at polls, we can discuss it further. It was fascinating how the sociology of religion, this big academic science, began. What does it say? Modernity goes hand in hand with religion, but secularization disappears. The more religious you are, the less modern you are. At one point, I had a conversation with the then president of the Association for the Sociology of Religion, a professor at the London School. We were at an international congress in Sydney, and she said she published an incredible book explaining, look what happened. Europe actually becomes truly Europe. When they saw Americans were religious, tech-savvy, and modern, they said, yeah, America's an exception. Indeed, America was the first exception. Later, as they looked closer at America, exploring other regions, they realized, wait a minute, these guys didn't eradicate religion like we did. She published a famous book about 20 years ago stating Europe is an exceptional case. So the idea that modernity means absence of religion, Europe is the major expression of modernity. Then this work comes out saying, hold on, Europe's an exception. Actually, modernity isn't necessarily against religion. We made it that way. Our debate was that it isn't like that everywhere. Which we? You guys are Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, things were more nuanced. So coming back to our point, we are... Now consider a unique case. A society completely without feelings, especially religious or spiritual ones. This is the ultimate paradox and geopolitically very serious. It's a complex issue, but I acknowledge the deep challenge it presents.
Some, including Russian thinkers, traditionalists, and conservatives, have tried to engage with the movement in the United States as well as other religious traditionalist movements. These include both Orthodox and non-Orthodox Christians, but all within the Christian faith. Why is this happening? Because we ourselves opened the door wide to Europe, creating an opportunity for such a possibility to take root. When Donald Trump spoke and when President Putin addressed the Valdai Forum back in 2007, they touched on this very subject. When it was about the famous Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi and his controversies, his parties, bunga, 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 bunga. And they say, sir, they arrested him, just arrested Berlusconi's friend. They caught him with women. If they caught him with men, they wouldn't have done anything.
Yes.
When Putin said that, sure, it shocked people a bit, but it acted as a clear signal that Russia was deliberately moving toward traditionalism. But the real question is, why did Russia decide to shift to traditionalism? One big reason is that Europeans opened the door wide for this kind of transformation. We, as Europeans, literally opened the door wide to these ideas and even allowed the Russian Federation to freely practice this type of discourse right here in Europe, a Europe that had completely forgotten and moved away from such values and conversations. The lack of religious sensitivity on our part until now has definitely impacted our relationship with Russia in deep ways. However, now, in my opinion, the relationship with America is going to pose a major handicap going forward. The fact that Europeans started noticing these issues, it's definitely no coincidence that this heated discussion came up soon after what happened surrounding Kirk's assassination.
That shows Europeans are gearing up for a confrontation, a war, and it's going to affect us. So how will it affect us? Because we'll probably be forced to join this confrontation, and we'll see its effects spreading to the decision-making and national public discourse spaces, where our European identity will be emphasized. How religion will be handled, I don't know, because first of all, Europeans don't really know how to confront it. They only know how to approach it. You know what? For them, they've lost. They've already lost. Mr. Neamțu, even a religiously inclined thinker like Nietzsche or Cioran, no, as Ionescu said, the one who curses God is closer to God than the one for whom God doesn't even exist anymore. For them, God isn't even a question. Their indifference runs deep. You could still talk Nietzsche, Cioran with them, but not with the ones who say, I don't know God, no. A decent person lives their life without any connection to religion. These people These people, this whole group, you just can't bring them into a real conversation anymore. To them, Americans seem like dangerous reactionary savages, totally out of touch with modern values. People who ruin things, who want to drag us back to pre-modern times, some medieval types. Like I said, it's a whole different world, a different species.
All right, medieval as it may be, it's really killing us economically in a big way. Europe's stuck in a long, deep rut. 15 to 20 years ago, the EU's GDP was roughly on par with the US. Nowadays, the US outperforms us on nearly every major economic front, which is quite alarming.
All these entities that...
Religious, yes, but they have always been richer, smarter, and more educated than we ever were.
It's not even comparable. They're way stronger than us, and yet we go begging to them. That's Europe's dramatic paradox. We beg the Chinese for security. We beg the Americans for security. We tell the Chinese, sir, please don't support Russia anymore. It's important to us. The Chinese look at Europeans like small...
They look at Europeans as small, almost like tiny insects they had some respect for. The paradox is that many of President Xi's Chinese visions or development formulas
for global civilization strategy, global security strategy, and global governance strategy, many elements were based on the EU's economic model. The EU's peaceful expansion and development deeply appealed to the Chinese leadership as it closely aligned with their own long-term aspirations and vision for growth without conflict or confrontation.
the seduction without war.
And surely the Chinese had great respect and hoped that Europeans at some point after Trump had
Scolded them a bit would be
brave enough to take their fate into their own hands and work with China, even against America. But that didn't happen. The Chinese watched them with a kind of condescending pity. Yes, sir, we like you, but make up your minds, decide already. Europeans, poor things, go to the Americans and abase themselves, and everyone sees it. They go to the Chinese, abase themselves again, and everyone notices. They actually don't play any real role. They're the biggest backers of the war in Ukraine, yet they aren't at the negotiation table. Do you realize? I realize the paradox and this madness, this weakness. It's like you're buying your way out. How do I say it? You're like
Europe in the role of, I don't know, what's his name from Playboy, who would buy himself with money.
Una, please forgive me for bringing up this reference. I probably shouldn't even know it, but here we are discussing it now.
If I were a believer,
Europe buys the young ladies who walk around with money. In other words, it pays to be taken seriously in a conversation. But even then, it's not actually taken seriously. Because when it comes to key gestures or fundamental actions, it's not at the table. So it pays. Nobody invites it. It goes waits in Trump's antechamber. It goes to the Chinese begging. America's weakness here is deep. Now, maybe some have noticed this in that whole context, because there are dreamers in Europe too, 0.01%. I've met them at international conferences, the ones who believe in building a federal Europe like medieval Gothic cathedrals, where one generation sees the first part, the next generation the next, and only the third generation sees the work complete. But they were few and a bit odd. Sorry to say that, even in serious academic circles. It's likely one of these dreamers who think Trump's war woke us up, right? Just like it did for Canada. Canadians have a liberal government now as a reaction. They don't have a government. It's called liberalism because that's what people truly wanted, a government reflecting liberal values. Interestingly, Trump, oddly enough, ended up saving Canadian liberalism. Canada's long agony dragged on unresolved. Europeans watch and say, look at the Danes with Greenland. They show we can stand on our own feet. So we rise confident and start a culture war with the Americans. That's exactly what will happen. This is the real breaking news, impacting us directly. We'll see political parties adopting parts of the US politically, culturally, even spiritually. They'll embrace aspects of Trump's world. That'll be fascinating to watch over time.
sir,
Paradoxically, we are better positioned than the Germans or French on this because their religious influence is much stronger. Here, it won't be completely absent, but almost entirely so. I propose an analogy between the Solidarność movement and MAGA. They had a martyr in the Catholic priest Jerzy Popieluszko, cold-bloodedly killed by the secret police in 1984. Charlie Kirk was also cold-bloodedly assassinated by an Antifa member. I don't need to tell you to be cautious with these words.
An extremist group.
An extremist, even terrorist group. And just like the blood of martyrs, as Tertullian said once, becomes the seed of the church, I dare say Charlie Kirk's blood will bring a fresh, unexpected revival to the MAGA movement. It will bear fruit in 10, 20, even 30 years without more martyrs. These theological political movements surprisingly don't have a future. And I think I must add one more thing, and with that, I invite your thoughts. The only real echo of Charlie Kirk's death in Romania was within the Orthodox Church. I was pleasantly surprised by an Orthodox bishop's statement saying, Charlie's martyrdom for free speech shows that persecution has shifted, if you will, from the East, where it's firmly established. Persecution of Christians there is tied to radical Islam and terrorist groups like Boko Haram in Africa and so on. But now persecution has moved to the civilized parts of North America, and Charlie's martyrdom is a source of inspiration. How do you see this lack of response, I repeat, to Charlie Kirk's death from Romanian institutions, the presidency, Cotroceni, Victoria Palace? I saw no statements of sympathy or empathy for Charlie. But at the Orthodox Church, yes.
It would have been the height of absurdity for that to happen. Because everything that... In Romania, it wasn't built as an institution. The word is totally off. Everything that's happened in Romania lately, institutionally speaking, is, to put it simply for our viewers, part of the Soros world, a world that's clearly in agony. But we keep trying to pull it back. We still believe it can save us. That world won't save you anymore. These folks are, if you will, selectively chosen, keeping things in perspective to be different from Trump's world. It's almost a natural selection. It's like walking the halls of Brussels, looking at how the officials there present themselves. Sociologically, it makes sense. When these people get jobs, you have to talk a certain way, look a certain way, dress a certain way. So this political, bureaucratic, administrative class keeps renewing itself. They look a certain way because that's how hiring in Brussels has always worked. Now, there's no other way. And if you go to them and when you talk to them about the MAGA world and political theology, which shifts from left to right, they often look at you as if you're some kind of strange creature. Not because they're bad people. Many of them are decent folks with good hearts. But they simply see you as a stranger, someone with different values. And they wonder, what exactly do you believe in? If you mention that the European Union once funded certain initiatives, they might find that hard to grasp. Churches, monasteries, and Athos, they'll look at you like you're... Again, some strange animal. Athos, what is that?
For them, the Delphi and Athos temples hold the same value. Both are heritage sites.
But if you tell them, hey, be a bit more strategic, use this to attract people, 50-something% of Europeans identify as believers. Yet we don't even have a speech for them. At least make one strategically. They can't even grasp the importance of a religious speech, strategically speaking.
But did you know only 5% go to church in Brussels? I mean, commissioners, parliamentarians. No. That statistic's been made too.
There are many. 5% is actually quite a significant number. Those people represent a completely different breed. This particular breed is heavily overrepresented in Brussels, mostly because it perpetuates itself through certain hiring mechanisms, various support systems, and similar processes. As a result, they end up making crucial political decisions. These individuals wield political power far beyond what their share of the population would suggest. This is essentially what the Brussels state is about. After that comes the next challenge, which you might call the battle at the national level. And that battle is ours.
Bureaucrats.
The bureaucrats leading us now come from that exclusive inner circle we've talked about.
But they'll all crowd in, I can't help it, at the National Cathedral's inauguration, set for October 26th.
Interesting to watch.
They'll even cross themselves if they have to. Maybe they'll even stand in front of a Byzantine icon.
Hold on, because even if Donald Trump will... Whether it's Ms. Tsoyu managing to spill coffee on Mr. J.D. Vance's lapel and Mr. Vance pretending to shake hands, of course he'll like J.D. Vance too. That's not really the core issue here. Sure, this chameleon act will be typical for politicians trying to win favor, but it simply won't hold up in the long run. It won't last. Not even for the short term. It just can't hold because it fundamentally lacks the strength and depth to last over time. Do you really think Trump sees Nabrowski as anything special or different? The only real difference, pardon me, between Mayor Nicu Șordan and Nabrowski is that Nabrowski happened to get lucky enough to be close to Donald Trump for a while. I mean,
both before and after.
Do you think Trump or these people don't watch others, don't feel them, don't see them, have no instinct for it? Of course they do. Now, J.D. Vance's political animal instinct is to disrespect those who aren't elected. That's why he kicked von der Leyen out when they went to meet Trump, and now we're the ones talking to her.
the unelected von der Leyen. Today, do you think they lack sensitivity? I say again, animalistic in the good sense, if I may.
I mean, spontaneous.
Towards those who aren't elected. Because America is a democracy. Yes, their people are chosen. The one who decides is elected has a mandate. You can't say someone not elected doesn't decide. Or if they're chosen by all sorts of methods, Mrs. von der Leyen didn't even have the courtesy to run in the European Parliament elections. And the whole idea of a fake candidate doesn't even work anymore, not even on paper. They used to try and fool us with it. So, getting back to this, these are different worlds, different species. That's why I think it's really important to note that the European Union is announcing a cultural war with the Americans. That's what this is actually about. They say it's with Trump, with the Americans. So when the EU declares something like this, just wait. What's to be done? I think it's actually great news because that means there's something to build. And here, if even the Europeans announce a cultural war with the Americans, they're not really announcing a war against Donald Trump. They're declaring a cultural war against a world that includes religion, national identity, grandma's smile, the flag, history, the memory of fallen soldiers, the fact that you take your kids to statues and
You teach them.
you carry it forward, a kind of local national spirit. This is their war. This is today's America. It's the America of statues, not the America tearing down statues. This spirit, if you will, politically embodied most effectively by Donald Trump. That's really the goal we're seeing here. So I strongly believe we should keep discussing this deeply. The cultural war, how can I put it, represents an ideal framework. Sure, God gives you the gift, but he doesn't put it in your bag. It's this perfect context for people to learn, to choose, to discern thoughtfully, because this war transcends us. And if we look at someone like Rubio, the prodigal son, for instance, who wasn't originally part of this movement and is now likely considering a run for president, it's obvious he has political motives. Maybe he's not the most sympathetic figure, and J.D. Vance isn't exactly his close friend either. As Rubio drifts his way, and Musk realizes he simply can't fight against it, many public figures around the world must grasp a crucial truth. At some point, everyone has to make a definitive choice.
I genuinely suspect Musk of being authentic in his views. Recently, he mentioned that losing Christianity might actually be a huge opportunity, but I think the truth is quite the opposite. Losing Christian values is actually a historic failure, not a chance. I also found it fascinating when Donald Trump, I'm not sure if you caught this moment, when Mrs. Trump was at a government meeting, which is traditionally hosted by the president of the country. It was a really interesting scene.
He's the head of government.
He is the head of government. At one point, he turns to Rubio and says, "You're so good as foreign secretary, I think you shouldn't do anything else in life. Maybe stop running for other posts." And of course, J.D. Vance was rubbing his hands with satisfaction. It's a symbolic battle.
Undeniably. It's not just fragile. The heir hasn't even shown up yet, and the fight is fierce. I mean, imagine a political battle in Romania. Multiply that by thousands, and you'll see how fierce political battles get.
Yeah, J.D. Vance is the front runner, no question. And I want to hear from those calling America racist when...
Right now, I also think J.D. Vance has the best shot.
We've got a few minutes left, Professor, so I want to turn your attention once more to Europe. There, the situation is quite alarming. Several candidates are dropping dead under mysterious circumstances, about 7 just from the AfD alone. This isn't about political doctrine or party platforms. We're talking about candidates who are dying suddenly and inexplicably. Take Ludwigshafen, for example, an industrial city where the AfD candidate was actually banned from running. This city has become quite notable recently. It's not just Germany. Romania has banned several candidates as well. Back in Germany, specifically in Ludwigshafen, the AfD candidate's mayoral bid was blocked. Yet, despite that, AfD has surged to 3rd place in Westphalia, a region where they were originally considered just an East German party. They're rapidly gaining ground in Western Germany too. Meanwhile, France is practically aflame with unrest. Italy is led by Giorgia Meloni, who's seeking to unify the conservative movement there, and the United Kingdom is battling serious economic challenges that are shaking the political landscape.
Neither do we feel much better. Just to remind you, Moldova is having elections right now. I'm not exactly sure how many parties have been banned, but believe me, even at this very moment, as we speak, there's a lot happening that's quite concerning and worth paying attention to.
The elections are Sunday.
2 parties have been banned from
The race, yes. So here in Romania, I won't even start on that because there's so much happening. It's really something else.
In Germany, two key developments deserve focus. The AfD stays discreet, mirrored by the German mainstream media, which often delays official responses to major events to avoid stirring unrest. This almost morbid discretion reveals a lot. The AfD now confronts mayors and candidates directly because fear is growing in their ranks. Importantly, once AfD crosses from East to West Germany electorally, it changes everything. It brings up the real possibility of a coalition with the Christian Democrats, the core of this political story. Breaking into West Germany makes it harder to keep the AfD isolated as the political landscape shifts and barriers weaken. Containing the party becomes a true challenge now. They mix, if you want, not necessarily the populations, since Germans are all the same, but mentalities are getting closer and mixing. And they know it. That's why they wanted to stop the momentum. Because banning the Alternative für Deutsche becomes complicated. It's still the biggest party in Germany. I don't rule anything out, not at all.
With Trump in Washington?
I don't rule it out, but it's hard to believe. Speaking of current elections in Europe, nothing can be ruled out these days. Unfortunately, I have to be honest about that. In Germany, there's a fierce political battle going on. The key question everyone is asking is, what's really going to happen next? The Alternative for Germany party, which we often call AfD, is growing stronger. Will they end up forming a coalition with the Christian Democrats, or maybe just part of them? How do you break the cordon sanitaire that has kept them isolated for so long, so that a reorganization of Germany's political landscape can even be considered? Or will you just leave Alternative at 50% support, while the rest of the parties continue forming coalitions to keep them out? That's the big danger here. The goal is to prevent Alternative from entering the Western mainstream political space, but it's getting harder. This struggle reflects a larger conflict within Europe as a whole.
I think the fact that people are disappearing, and with France involved, the whole European war, could truly change everything in ways that we just can't predict or fully understand right now.
They shift to a new paradigm once they move from the national level to the broader European stage, and I truly believe that's where the future lies. The medium and long-term stake is really quite important, because what we want right now is the Europeanization of European politics, which can only truly be achieved by gradually transferring certain national prerogatives, whatever remains of them, over to Brussels. Of national prerogatives, whatever remains to Brussels. I won't go into technical details, but right now Brussels holds a few prerogatives. Speaking of the nation-state, we have given up part of our sovereignty. We still keep some of these prerogatives, including health, which used to be the nation-state's domain, monetary policy, and external political security. They want to shift all these prerogatives to Brussels. Why? To Europeanize the continent's politics. The cultural war with America is, if you will, the framework within which they probably want to do this. Europe doesn't yet have a complete understanding of von der Leyen's speech delivered in front of the European Parliament. It was intriguingly modeled after an American president's State of the Union address. For the very first time, and surprisingly this has been analyzed very little, she delivered a speech with a Churchillian tone. She emphasized that it's Europe's moment now. It's time for Europe to take full control of its own destiny. Europe fought tremendously in the past. It was oppressed in 1989. That year marked the first shining moment when we all united, a pivotal point really. So national histories no longer stand alone. They have blended into a shared European history. We are with the people, we the Europeans, she stressed. That is the essential message, the core of von der Leyen's entire speech, from beginning to end, built on that very foundation. The Europeanization of politics within the European space seems to be the strategy she will likely pursue. Why this approach? Because there still exists an idea entrenched within Brussels that Europe must become a significant global player on the world stage. Otherwise, it can't be done. And here, to be perfectly blunt, I mean, unless you completely hide democracy away, or if you will, abandon democracy altogether to push Europe towards a centralized state, because if you keep democracy alive, there's no way you can truly centralize it. The dilemma the European elites face right now is clear. If they want to remain democratic, building a federation is impossible. Polls consistently show people reject the idea outright. But to actually create a federation, you'd have to give up being democratic. Presently, they're likely to choose abandoning democracy, and from that point onwards, they'll become extremely cautious about public elections. They'll vigilantly monitor who rises to positions like president or prime minister, since unexpected winners could disrupt crucial plans. This is the fundamental battle Europe faces when talking about returning to a united Europe. It's going to be politically tough, certainly complicated, but culturally and politically, it could open up interesting opportunities. Now, contrast that with America, which thinks quite differently on these matters. So, how exactly do you capture attention when so much is at stake? This question really hits at the core of our current political and cultural crossroads. Is there truly a significant number in Romania who want to be like America? Because this is the big issue for our generation, especially while we remain visible and active in the public eye. If we miss this moment, the consequences will be deeply serious and far-reaching. Without the crucial support of the United States, we simply won't have the strength or the political will to effectively fight back against the powerful political machine coming out of Brussels. This mechanism will try to seize control of our destiny without ever consulting us. We absolutely can't let that happen, not now, not ever.
Which will try to impose, if you will, its own secular religion. But before diving deeper, let me sincerely thank our friends at Bacania din Pipera. Romanian treats await you as well, Sir Professor, a delightful surprise. These wonderful Romanians encourage not only to think Romanian, but also to savor Romanian products. Romania is navigating through an economic crisis right now. I'm just saying it's increasingly important to, why not, frequent these Romanian shops. Even more crucial is supporting local producers rather than relying on farms from abroad. But, Sir Professor, besides this support for our dear friends, we also want to remind everyone that the book Șah Însângerat is available at Mihail Neamțu Botro. I'll come back to you with one last question. Considering that European globalist secular liberalism is clearly struggling and doesn't seem to be doing very well, on the other hand, Russian imperial Euro-Asianism doesn't appeal to us either because, as we all know, we have suffered so much from it before. So, how do you see the future path for our country in this complex ideological landscape?
That's exactly his point. So, what do you think is really the best way to reinvent national conservatism in Eminescu's or Maiorescu's Romania today?
You really don't need to invent much when it comes to this discourse, honestly. The key thing is to let this kind of conversation happen openly and freely in public spaces. We don't need all new revolutionary ideas. It's more about opening doors and making sure this kind of message is at least equally represented, not just in the media and public forums, but especially in the educational system, which is honestly in a pretty bad state right now. Miraculous solutions won't just magically appear out of nowhere. So if we want to rebuild and reshape the narrative, the first step is to talk about it openly, honestly, and consistently. Reflect on the interwar period, which was a time filled with huge dilemmas and challenges. After the devastation of World War I, democracy and political order completely collapsed. This chaos gave birth to national conservative revolutions that aimed to restore identity and stability. These movements arose because people were desperately searching for meaning after immense destruction. So, the focus isn't on inventing something entirely new, it's about bringing those important conversations to light and influencing the public narrative in a meaningful way. Conservative revolutions, as the Germans called them, along with communism and fascist or undemocratic movements, rose from the huge failure of World War I. That war was the biggest existential shock to Romania and Europe because it caused an entire world to fall apart completely. European optimism, Western optimism, if you will, had peaked around 1914-15, right before the war hit and shattered everything. It was like the devastating earthquake in 18th century Portugal, just when the Enlightenment was shining its brightest. That earthquake destroyed everything and left people confused, not knowing what was really happening. It begs the question, can we or can't we rebuild what was lost?
Voltaire wrote about God too.
So the big shock, really the massive one, was World War I. People, including Maulescu and others, endeavored to invent corporatism, attempting to formulate a response to a challenge that basically said, if you look backward, you won't find any solutions, none that are effective or relevant anymore. That was the fundamental shock of the era. Now, political doctrines, take the Romanian Social Institute, for example, they organized a conference or even a series of conferences, gathering experts, specialists dedicated to each doctrine, not just politicians, to discuss what political doctrines truly mean in today's world. They asked, what answers do traditional political doctrines still offer when faced with modern challenges? They brought everyone together, resulting in a comprehensive volume. We participated in a conversation on this very subject. What does conservatism mean in contemporary terms? What about collectivism, agrarianism, social democracy, liberalism, and so on? It was a rich and thoughtful discussion. Romanian conservatism, if you will, represents a unique perspective shaped by history and evolving circumstances.
This needs to be seen in light of potential responses to a crisis that for our generation isn't entirely new. Those active in public life over the past 30 years haven't faced this exact crisis because we're witnessing a major shift in the global order. What Trump did was just highlight this enormous change. Regarding Europe, it's hard to picture it becoming what Mrs. von der Leyen suggested recently. So we must ask, what's our answer to this changing world? Which doctrine should we follow? Traditional social democracy or liberalism? Today's Romanian party crisis shows a deeper lack of meaningful conversation and vision. I believe the best path for Romanian conservatism is to start a real conversation about what it means today. People with thoughtful perspectives should join in. If this doesn't awaken us, then we need to seriously reflect on where we go from here.
Even the incident with Charles Kirk in the United States really shows me how difficult it is to imagine anything more shocking than what we've been seeing from this particular perspective. For me personally, it's hard to think of a more startling event. So this really opens up a huge opportunity for Romanian conservatism in its broadest and most inclusive sense. It all depends on us. Are there still enough of us who are willing and able to get this moving or to actively put this into action, to truly transform this into a significant cultural political project? Unfortunately, I emphasize cultural political deliberately because today, sadly, there is almost nothing cultural left in Romania. We need to be very aware of just how minimal the cultural space has become, or even strictly cultural and strictly political scientific space, because, forgive me, this is often how things unfold during such tumultuous and breaking eras. You hardly find that neutral space anymore. It's rapidly disappearing, and that's something we need to acknowledge and work around if possible. You know, it used to be possible to find a neutral ground, a space where you could literally sit between two erupting volcanoes and say, "Sir, this is the place from which I can speak scientifically and culturally." But unfortunately, that space no longer exists. The reality today is that everything we do is either cultural, political, or, to put it another way, academic political. There is no genuine neutrality left. Now, that might seem like a drawback, and while it has certain advantages, it's especially tough for those of us who were educated in a kind of academic culture that sadly doesn't quite fit anymore, not just in Romanian society, but globally. But we shouldn't despair. If you look at recent talks, even the scientific debates, like those about vaccines or treatments, for example, will often get dragged into political territory. Take Donald Trump's recent comments. They illustrate how political discourse now dominates even science because nothing remains untouched by politics. This is the condition we live in. We have to accept it and figure out what we can do moving forward.
And if we have capable people like this project to come to fruition in the Romanian space.
Fortunately, here on Lumea lui Dungaciu, on our Vocea Libertății channel, we explore deep and complex questions. We challenge some secular dogmas of today's world, and thankfully we can say openly, because our mission is education, that true freedom isn't just about choosing, but about choosing wisely and responsibly. Wise choices come from being informed and guided by moral tradition, which often holds deeper wisdom than fleeting opinions. Professor, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. We'll see you next week. Please like and subscribe. Your support helps our community grow. I'm Mihail Neamțu, and together we're building a woke-free Romania, grounded in truth and real freedom. Goodbye and take care.